Candace Owens just dropped a revelation that has conservatives, liberals, and political insiders completely stunned. In a recent statement, she revealed a previously unknown donor link connected to TPUSA, and the reaction has been nothing short of explosive. Fans who once believed they understood the funding behind the movement are now questioning everything. Social media erupted within minutes, with supporters demanding transparency and critics calling it proof of deeper influence behind the scenes. Was this information hidden on purpose, or is this the beginning of a much bigger exposure? As Candace pulls back the curtain, one thing is clear. This revelation could change how people see TPUSA forever. Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Candace Owens has never been a stranger to controversy, but her latest revelation sent shockwaves through political media and online communities alike. When news broke that Owens had publicly discussed an alleged donor link connected to Turning Point USA, TPUSA, reactions were immediate, intense, and deeply divided. Supporters praised her for speaking truth to power, while critics accused her of fueling internal drama within conservative circles. Regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. This moment marked a significant turning point in an already complex political narrative. To understand why this revelation hit such a nerve, it's important to look at the background of Candace Owens herself. Once widely associated with conservative activism and closely linked to TPUSA during her rise in political commentary, Owens became a recognizable voice for a new generation of right-leaning media consumers. Her sharp rhetoric, unapologetic style, and viral moments helped grow both her platform and her influence. TPUSA, meanwhile, positioned itself as a major force in conservative youth activism, building a vast donor network and hosting large-scale events that drew national attention for years. Owens and TPUSA were often mentioned in the same breath. Their shared audiences and overlapping goals created the perception of unity, even as behind-the-scenes disagreements reportedly simmered. When Owens began distancing herself from certain organizations and narratives, many assumed it was simply a matter of ideological evolution. Few expected that she would eventually speak openly about internal funding connections that, according to her, deserved public scrutiny. The revelation itself didn't come in the form of a polished exposé or a formal report. Instead, it emerged during candid commentary, an approach Owens is known for. She suggested that certain donor relationships tied to TPUSA were not widely understood by the public, and that transparency around these connections mattered more than loyalty to institutions. While she stopped short of making legal accusations, her framing implied that financial influence plays a larger role in shaping political movements than many supporters realize. Almost instantly, social media platforms lit up. Clips were shared, dissected, and reinterpreted across X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Fans who admired Owens for her independence saw the revelation as proof that she was unwilling to protect powerful organizations at the expense of honesty. Others felt blindsided, questioning why such information was being discussed publicly rather than handled privately. Within hours, hashtags related to Candace Owens and TPUSA began trending, drawing in commentators from across the political spectrum. Supporters of TPUSA were quick to respond, emphasizing that donor funding is a standard aspect of large political organizations and does not automatically imply wrongdoing. Many argued that Owens' comments lacked context and risked misleading audiences who might not understand how nonprofit funding works. From this perspective, the issue wasn't about secrecy, but about perception, in how easily trust can be shaken in the digital age. On the other hand, Owens' defenders argued that transparency is essential, especially for movements that claim grassroots authenticity. They pointed out that questioning donor influence doesn't equate to accusing individuals of corruption. Instead, they framed the discussion as part of a broader conversation about accountability in modern political activism. To them, Owens was doing what many public figures avoid, challenging the systems that helped elevate her. What made the situation even more compelling was the timing. conservative media has recently been grappling with internal fractures, ideological purity tests, and competition for audience loyalty. In this environment, even subtle criticisms can feel like major betrayals. Owen's willingness to air concerns publicly was seen by some as courageous and by others as reckless, fueling a narrative of division that mainstream outlets were quick to amplify. The mainstream media response added another layer of complexity. Some outlets framed the revelation as evidence of infighting within conservative ranks, while others treated it as a cautionary tale about influencer-driven politics. Headlines emphasized shock and drama, often focusing more on the fallout than on the substance of the claims. This coverage, in turn, intensified online debates, as audiences accused journalists of exploiting controversy for clicks. At the heart of the discussion lies a broader question. How much influence do donors really have over political messaging and leadership decisions? This is not a new concern, but Owen's comments brought it back into the spotlight, particularly among younger audiences who are skeptical of traditional power structures. For them, the idea that funding sources might shape narratives isn't shocking, it's expected. What surprised them was hearing it acknowledged so openly by someone once closely aligned with a major organization. As the dust began to settle, observers noted that neither side had presented definitive evidence of misconduct. The conversation remained largely about trust, perception, and transparency rather than legal or ethical violations. Still, reputational damage doesn't require proof beyond doubt. Only enough uncertainty to make supporters question what they thought they knew. This first phase of the controversy set the tone for what would follow. Candace Owens had effectively reopened a conversation many preferred to keep quiet, and TPUSA now faced the challenge of addressing concerns without escalating tensions further. Whether this moment would lead to meaningful reform, deeper division, or simply fade into the endless cycle of online outrage remained unclear. One thing, however, was certain: the relationship between prominent political voices and the organizations that support them would never look quite the same. Owen's revelation served as a reminder that influence, money, and ideology are tightly intertwined, and that when those connections are questioned publicly, the shockwaves can be felt far beyond any single movement. As the initial shock of Candace Owens' comments began to wear off, the conversation surrounding the alleged TPUSA donor link shifted from raw reaction to deeper analysis. Supporters, critics, and neutral observers alike started asking harder questions, not just about what Owens said, but about what it meant for the broader conservative movement and political activism as a whole. The controversy was no longer just about one revelation. It had become a case study in trust, power, and influence. In the days following her remarks, Owens clarified her stance without fully walking it back. She emphasized that her goal was not to destroy organizations or individuals, but to encourage transparency. According to her, political movements gain credibility when they are honest about how they are funded and who holds influence behind the scenes. This framing resonated with many fans who had followed her career, precisely because of her willingness to challenge authority, even when that authority existed within her own ideological circle. However, critics were unconvinced. Some argued that Owens' approach blurred the line between transparency and provocation by raising questions publicly without offering detailed documentation. They claimed she fueled speculation rather than informed discussion. In the age of viral clips and short-form content, nuance often gets lost, and even carefully worded statements can be transformed into explosive narratives once they hit social media. TPUSA supporters and affiliated commentators responded by highlighting the organization's public financial disclosures and nonprofit status. They stressed that donor funding is both legal and necessary for large-scale activism, especially for groups organizing nationwide events, campus outreach, and media campaigns. From their perspective, Owens' comments risked reinforcing a misleading idea that donor involvement automatically equates to hidden control or unethical behavior. Yet, the controversy refused to die down. Independent commentators began dissecting the broader implications, pointing out that this debate wasn't unique to TPUSA. Across the political spectrum, organizations rely on wealthy donors, foundations, and sponsorships. What made this situation different was the messenger. Owens was not an external critic or a political opponent. She was someone who had once benefited from the same ecosystem. She was now questioning. This perceived insider critique gave her words extra weight. Even those who disagreed with her interpretation admitted that the discussion exposed a growing discomfort among audiences. Younger viewers, in particular, expressed frustration with what they saw as performative grassroots branding. They wanted clarity. Who funds these movements? What expectations come with that funding? And how much independence do prominent voices really have? Meanwhile, mainstream media outlets continued to frame the situation as evidence of conservative infighting. Panels and opinion pieces speculated about fractured alliances, personal grievances, and potential fallout for both Owens and TPUSA. Some commentators suggested that the controversy reflected a broader struggle for relevance and control in a crowded media landscape, where personalities often rival institutions in influence. Behind the scenes, the tension highlighted a fundamental shift in political media. Individual brands now wield power comparable to, and sometimes greater than, established organizations. When those individuals decide to speak out, institutions can no longer rely on quiet damage control. Everything plays out in public, amplified by algorithms that reward conflict and controversy. Owens supporters argued that this shift was overdue. They claimed that movements should not depend on silence or loyalty to maintain credibility. Instead, they should welcome scrutiny and debate as signs of maturity. From this viewpoint, discomfort was not a flaw, but a necessary step toward accountability. On the other side, critics worried about long-term consequences. Public disputes, they warned, could weaken movements by distracting from shared goals and providing ammunition to ideological opponents. Even if no wrongdoing existed, the perception of chaos could erode trust among donors, volunteers, and supporters. As discussions grew more polarized, a quieter group emerged, those calling for balance. These voices acknowledged the importance of transparency while also urging responsibility in how sensitive topics are presented. They argued that conversations about funding and influence should be grounded in facts, context, and a clear understanding of nonprofit operations, rather than driven by emotion or speculation. By the end of this phase, the controversy had evolved into something larger than its original spark. It was no longer just about Candace Owens or TPUSA. It had become a mirror reflecting the challenges of modern political activism, the tension between independence and institutional support, the struggle for authenticity in a donor-driven environment, and the difficulty of maintaining unity in an era where every disagreement becomes public spectacle. Whether this moment would lead to constructive change or simply fade into the endless churn of online drama remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the conversation Owens ignited had forced supporters and critics alike to confront uncomfortable questions. They could no longer ignore DAT as the controversy surrounding Candace Owens' revelation began to settle into a more reflective phase. The long-term implications started to come into focus. What initially appeared as a shocking disclosure had now evolved into a broader debate about power, credibility, and the future of political movements built in the digital age. For many observers, the most important question was no longer what was revealed, but what happens next. Candace Owens, known for her unapologetic independence, appeared unfazed by the backlash. In follow-up commentary, she doubled down on her belief that movements should be strong enough to withstand internal criticism. According to her, loyalty should never override honesty, and transparency should not be treated as betrayal. This stance further cemented her image as a figure willing to risk relationships and reputation to maintain control over her own narrative. For TPUSA, the moment served as a stress test. While the organization continued its operations without interruption, The conversation forced it to confront growing skepticism among certain segments of its audience. In an era where supporters expect openness and authenticity, even the perception of secrecy can create doubt. Whether or not Owen's claims changed any internal practices, they highlighted the need for clearer communication and proactive engagement with critics. Beyond the individuals and organizations involved, the episode revealed a deeper shift in political culture. The traditional model where institutions quietly managed relationships and messaging has been disrupted by influencer-driven media. Personal brands now operate with a level of autonomy that makes centralized control nearly impossible. When disagreements arise, they don't stay behind closed doors. They play out in real time before millions of viewers. This shift has both benefits and risks. On one hand, it empowers voices to speak freely and challenge entrenched systems. On the other, it creates an environment where partial information can spark outrage before full context is available. The Owens TP USA controversy demonstrated how quickly narratives can spiral, regardless of intent. Supporters on both sides eventually reached a common realization: trust is fragile. Once questioned, it requires more than denial or dismissal to rebuild. Transparency, consistency, and accountability are no longer optional. They are expectations. Movements that fail to recognize this reality risk losing relevance, especially among younger audiences who are deeply skeptical of traditional power structures. At the same time, the episode raised important questions about responsibility. With influence comes the power to shape perceptions, and with that power comes the obligation to communicate carefully. Many observers argue that meaningful change requires both courage and precision, challenging systems while ensuring that audiences are not left with confusion or misinformation. As public attention slowly shifted to the next headline, the impact of this controversy lingered beneath the surface. It served as a reminder that political unity is not maintained through silence, but neither is it strengthened by unchecked conflict. The path forward lies somewhere in between, where transparency and accountability coexist with thoughtful dialogue. In the end, Candace Owens' revelation may be remembered less for the specific details and more for the conversation it sparked. It exposed the complexities of modern activism and the delicate balance between independence and collaboration. Whether viewed as a necessary wake-up call or an avoidable controversy, it underscored a simple truth. In today's media landscape, nothing stays hidden for long, and every revelation, real or perceived, has the power to reshape trust. The Candace Owens TP USA revelation is more than just a headline. It's a wake-up call for anyone who cares about transparency, accountability, and integrity in political movements. Whether you're a supporter, a critic, or someone simply trying to understand the influence behind the scenes, this story shows how important it is to stay informed and ask questions. Don't take statements at face value. Dig deeper, research the facts, and form your own perspective. Engage with the conversation responsibly. Share credible sources, fact-check claims, and avoid spreading misinformation. If you're part of a movement or organization, hold yourself and leaders accountable. Transparency isn't a weakness, it's a strength that builds trust and credibility. We also encourage discussion in your community. Talk with friends, family, or colleagues about what this means for political activism today. The more people are informed, the healthier the dialogue becomes. Finally, stay tuned to updates. Owens' revelations may just be the beginning of a broader conversation about funding, influence, and independence in modern movements. Follow reliable channels, subscribe to updates, and be part of the audience that prioritizes truth over sensationalism. Knowledge is power, use it wisely.